welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're going to be continuing reading from The Whydah, a pirate ship feared, wrecked, and found by Martin W. Sandler. And we started this last week, so I will put the link to the first chapter down below. So the Whydah is a pirate ship from the early 1700s that started off as a slaving ship and then was captured by a pirate and then eventually sunk to the bottom with the treasure and was rediscovered in modern times. So this is the full story of the ship and everything that happened. The first chapter is all about the ship's history as a slaving ship. Now we're going to learn a little bit more about the pirate who is going to capture it. Chapter 2, A New Pirate King. His name was Samuel Bellamy. He was sometimes called Black Sam or Black Bellamy because of his jet black hair and dark complexion. And he didn't wear his hair under a powdered wig, as was the fashion of the time, but grew it long and tied it back with a black satin bow. With his long velvet coat, knee breeches, silk stockings, and silver-buckled shoes, he cut a most dashing figure. His outfit was completed by the sword that hung at his left hip and the 4 pistols that were secured by a broad sash. Even though he could be as ferocious and even as brutal as any of his fellow pirate leaders, he often showed mercy and generosity toward those whom he captured on his raids. These traits earned him the nickname Robin Hood of the Seas. Bellamy was born in the winter of 1689 in a small town near the seafaring city of Plymouth, England. The sea was in his blood, and he became a sailor on some of his neighbors' boats even before he reached his teens. He was still not 20 when he joined the British Navy and took part in several battles in the War of Spanish Succession, a conflict involving the major powers of Europe, including England. When the war ended in 1714, Great Britain abruptly released more than 40,000 sailors from service. Among those newly unemployed was 24-year-old Sam Bellamy, who decided to seek his fortune in America. He arrived in Provincetown on the tip of Cape Cod in the spring of 1715. The following spring, in nearby Newport, Rhode Island, he met Palsgrave Williams. The two were destined to become best friends and fellow adventurers. 42-year-old Williams, whose father had been Attorney General of Rhode Island, came from a wealthy family. He had also become well off in his own right by establishing himself as a highly successful goldsmith. But like Sam Bellamy, Williams was dissatisfied with his life. He wanted adventure. Bellamy, too, sought adventure, but more than anything else, he wanted to be rich. For more than 100 years, Spanish ships called galleons had been transporting enormous amounts of gold, silver, jewels, and other treasures mined in the New World or stolen from native peoples who lived there. Over these years, a good number of galleons had been lost at sea, the victims of hurricanes, typhoons, and other disasters. Stories of these sunken treasure ships had fired the imaginations of adventurers on both sides of the Atlantic who were eager to get their hands on the lost riches. Sam Bellamy was one of these men, and he had a particular treasure in mind. On July 30th, 1715, not long after Bellamy arrived in Provincetown, 11 Spanish ships loaded with tons of gold and silver sank off the coast of Florida in a hurricane. All this treasure was still lying on the seabed a year later. Here was their golden chance, Bellamy told Williams. Their chance to get rich beyond their wildest dreams, their chance to live like kings. What they needed to do was get to the spot where the ships had gone down and bring up the treasure before the Spanish mounted a recovery effort. Williams needed no convincing, and he promised Bellamy that he would lend him the money to buy a ship and hire a crew to make the dream a reality. According to legend, Sam Bellamy met someone else in the late spring of 1716 who would have a profound influence on his life. While Palsgrave Williams was raising the money to finance their treasure-seeking adventure, Bellamy was living at Higgins Tavern in the Cape Cod town of Eastham. One warm June evening, he took a walk through the cemetery adjoining the tavern. He had just begun his stroll when he heard the sound of a young woman singing. He came upon an apple tree, and sitting under it, absorbed in her song, was a young woman with the most golden hair and the deepest blue eyes he had ever seen. He could go no farther. He had to get to know that girl. Bellamy introduced himself. He learned that her name was Maria Hallett, and she was 15 years old. He told her what it was like to serve in the British Navy, what the battles at sea were like, and how much he wanted to make a success of himself. For her part, Maria had never seen a man as lively and as handsome as Sam Bellamy. And there was something more. Strange as it might seem to draw such a conclusion in just one meeting, there was no doubt about it. Something in his eyes told her that he indeed was going to make a name for himself. From their first meeting until Bellamy left in search of the Spanish treasure, he and Maria spent as much time together as they possibly could. But there was a problem. Maria's parents were not pleased with what was obviously developing into a serious relationship. As prosperous farmers, they had far more ambitious plans for their young daughter than a life with a sailor who, as far as they could tell, had little chance of providing Maria with the comforts they wished for her. Still, Maria kept up her relationship with Bellamy. Her feelings for him grew even stronger when he told her about the Spanish wrecks. He assured her that her parents would greet him with open arms when he returned to the Cape with a ship loaded with gold, silver, and precious jewels. As for her, he stated, he had every intention of marrying her when he returned and then taking her to the Caribbean and making her princess of their own island. Almost everything in the remarkable story of Sam Bellamy is well documented. Everything, that is, except the tale of Maria Hallett. As authors Barry Clifford and Paul Perry wrote, the truth about Sam and Maria's brief relationship will always remain shrouded in speculation. But as author Arthur T. Vanderbilt has also written, I would not be surprised if, someday, someone came across musty old records that proved there was a 15-year-old girl named Maria Hallett who lived in the Outer Cape in 1716, and there met the young sailor with dreams of Spanish gold. What is certain is that in early 1716, Bellamy, Williams, and a crew of about 30 men, including skilled divers, left Cape Cod in a small ship that Williams had obtained and sailed to the site of the wreck of the Spanish treasure fleet. When they arrived, they were hardly alone. Other groups of divers were attempting to locate the treasure as well, and no one was finding anything. For the next full month, the fortune seekers kept at it, sending their divers down to every likely spot. Finally, their provisions ran out. So too did their hopes. They hadn't found a single silver bar or one gold coin. Eventually, they would learn that they hadn't beaten the Spanish government to it after all. Spain had already completed a salvage operation so large and so successful that almost 80% of the treasure had been recovered. The remainder of the bounty would not be found for another 250 years by treasure hunters working with advanced modern equipment. In the meantime, Sam Bellamy was devastated. Gone were his dreams of instant wealth. He was embarrassed as well. He had boasted to people throughout Cape Cod that he would return with enormous riches. The thought of coming back empty-handed was something that neither he nor Palsgrave Williams could bear. More than ever, Bellamy was desperate to succeed, and out of that desperation came a bold plan. If he couldn't find treasure underneath the sea, then he would seize it from ships sailing on the surface. He would, in the language of the day, go on the account. He would become a pirate. Bellamy certainly had the heart of a pirate. Although he could be compassionate, he could also be ruthless. There was no question that he was brave and adventurous. Palsgrave Williams was ready to join him, as were the 30 members of his treasure-seeking crew, all of whom were bitterly disappointed at not having gained a share of sunken Spanish treasure. Prior to asking them to vote on whether or not they wanted to join his pirate band, Bellamy stood in front of them, holding a pirate flag. This flag, he told them, represents not death, but resurrection. From this day, we are new men. As their captain, Bellamy traded their salvage boat for 2 pirogues, huge flat-bottomed sailing canoes large enough to carry at least 50 men and several powerful swivel guns. The sight of 2 vessels with their occupants shouting wildly, waving their cutlasses, and arming their swivel guns became one of the most frightening sights the crew of any merchant vessel could see. Bellamy was so successful at raiding ships this way that before long he became the talk of the pirate community. Imagine that. Among those impressed with the reports of Bellamy's raids was one of the most influential pirates of them all. His name was Benjamin Hornigold, and he was a living legend, not only because of the amazing number of vessels he had captured and plundered, but also for the number of successful pirate captains and officers he had trained. Among his protégés at that time was a renegade named Edward Teach, who, under the name Blackbeard, would eventually become arguably the most famous pirate of all. Always on the lookout for more pirate talent, Hornigold met with Bellamy and invited him, Williams, and their crew to join his band. Bellamy was thrilled. Only months before, having failed to find the sunken treasure he had been dreaming about for so long, he had been tempted to regard himself a failure. Now, not only was he a budding pirate star, but he was also about to sail with Ben Hornigold aboard his flagship, the Mary Ann, and alongside the Postilion and its famous captain Oliver Lebeau, who often prowled the Caribbean with Hornigold in search of prey. And here is the picture of the famous Blackbeard, who was also mentored by Ben Hornigold. Who knew pirates had mentors? Bellamy and his men had been aboard the Mary Ann a short time when Hornigold and Lebeau took their ships on an extended voyage throughout the Caribbean, successfully pillaging merchant ships, particularly in the waters around Cuba. Late in May 1716, they sailed to the island of Hispaniola and anchored in a large bay. There, a dispute that had been simmering for some time broke out among Hornigold's sailors. As the Mary Ann had been sailing around Cuba, its lookouts had spotted several British merchant vessels, but Hornigold had refused to go after them. Proud of his English roots, he had developed a policy of not robbing British ships, no matter how valuable a cargo they might be carrying. That was a policy that most of Hornigold's crew could not abide. To them, every ship was fair game, and the greatest crime of all was letting a ship filled with treasure escape their grasp. When the Mary Ann anchored in Hispaniola, the crew voted to oust Hornigold as their captain. Abiding by the pirate code under which they operated, Hornigold and 26 men loyal to him accepted the vote, left the Mary Ann, and sailed off in a ship that was part of Hornigold's flotilla. In the short time that Bellamy had been aboard the Mary Ann, he must have impressed the crew, for as soon as Hornigold and his followers, including Blackbeard, departed, the rest of the crew voted Sam Bellamy to be their new captain. Alright, we're going to go back here and look at the Articles of Agreement. And this is the Pirate Code. Life aboard a pirate ship was governed by a code of laws called the Articles of Agreement, or simply the Articles, which were developed in the last half of the 1600s by pirates in the West Indies. No one could become a full-fledged member of a pirate crew unless he went on the account, meaning he first signed the Articles of Agreement and then swore on a Bible, an axe, or a skull to obey them. The Whydah's copy of the Articles was not recovered, but Bellamy's crew would have been governed by rules much like these from the notorious pirate Captain Bartholomew Roberts. 1. Every man shall have an equal vote in affairs of moment. He shall have an equal title to fresh provisions or strong liquors at any time seized, and shall use them at pleasure, unless a scarcity may make it necessary for the common good that a retrenchment may be voted. 2. Every man shall be called fairly in turn by the list on board of prizes, but if they defraud the company to the value of even a piece of 8 in plate, jewels, or money, they shall be marooned. If any man rob another, he shall have his nose and ears split, and be put ashore, or he shall be sure to encounter hardships. 3. None shall game for money, either with dice or cards. That surprises me. Gambling was illegal aboard pirate ships. I guess that makes sense because disputes might break out if one person won a lot. 4. The lights and candles should be put out at 8 at night. So pirate bedtime was 8 p.m. And if any of the crew desire to drink after that hour, they shall sit upon the open deck without lights. 5. Each man shall keep his piece, cutlass, and pistols at all times clean and ready for action. 6. No boy or woman be allowed amongst them. If any man shall be found seducing any of the latter sex, and carrying her to sea in disguise, he shall suffer death. 7. He that shall desert the ship or his quarters in time of battle shall be punished by death or marooning. 8. None shall strike another on board the ship, but every man's quarrel shall be ended on shore by sword or pistol in this manner. At the word of command from the quartermaster, each man being previously placed back to back, shall turn and fire immediately. If any man do not, the quartermaster shall knock the piece out of his hand. If both miss their aim, they shall take to their cutlasses, and he that draweth first blood shall be declared the victor. 9. No man shall talk of breaking up their way of living till each has a share of 1,000 pounds. Every man who shall become a cripple or lose a limb in his service shall have 800 pieces of 8 from common stock, and for lesser hurts proportionately. 10. The captain and the quartermaster shall receive 2 shares of a prize, the master gunner and boatswain 1 1/2 shares, all other officers 1 1/4, and private gentlemen of fortune 1 share each. 11. The musicians shall have rest on the Sabbath day only by right, all other days by favor only. Alright, let's continue the story of Sam Bellamy's pirate career. It was the beginning of what was probably the most amazing single year of capture and plunder in the long history of piracy. Bellamy, Williams, and their men quickly became the most feared pirates the Caribbean and the Atlantic had ever witnessed. They chased, stopped, and boarded every merchant ship they spotted. The sailors in these vessels put up very little resistance. They were terrified simply by the sight of pirates. Besides, they weren't being paid nearly enough to risk their lives defending goods that didn't belong to them. After the booty was removed from each ship he captured, Bellamy usually let the prize vessel move on, but not before offering the sailors on the plundered ship the chance to join his pirate crew. Sometimes, however, Bellamy would spot one of the merchant seamen who had a special skill that he felt was needed on his ship. That man would be forced to join the pirate crew, whether he wanted to or not. As he had done with Ben Hornigold, Olivier Lebeau and the Postilion often partnered with Bellamy. On November 9, 1716, after capturing and looting several small vessels off the Virgin Islands, they came upon a major prize. Between the islands of St. Thomas and what is now St. Croix, the lookouts on both the Marianne and the Postilion spotted a large English merchant ship. It was the Bonetta, carrying a huge cargo from Jamaica to Antigua. The 2 pirate vessels gave chase, and when they got close to the Bonetta, Lebeau raised a pirate flag, complete with skull and crossbones. Bellamy fired a cannon shot across the prize vessel's bow. Captain Savage of the Bonetta needed no more convincing. Not even waiting for a boarding party to appear, he had some of his men row him over to the Marianne, where he formally surrendered himself and his ship to Bellamy. The Bonetta's cargo was so large that Bellamy ordered Captain Savage to anchor the ship off St. Croix, where the Marianne and the Postilion joined them. For the better part of 2 weeks, while Savage and his crew were held prisoner on the island, the men of the 2 pirate ships transferred the captured goods from the Bonetta's hold to their vessels. When the transfer was finally completed and Bellamy was about to let Savage sail away with his empty ship, he made his usual offer to the Bonetta's crew. Any sailor who wanted to become a pirate and join the Marianne's crew was invited to do so. What happened next totally surprised Bellamy and his men. Stepping forward to accept the offer was John King, who, with his mother, was a passenger on board the Bonetta. It might not have been surprising that a passenger on a seagoing vessel would, for whatever reason, welcome the chance to become a pirate. But John King was at most 10 years old. Young as he was, after watching Bellamy and his men in action, he was determined to join the pirates. Understandably, King's mother became hysterical at the thought. But John King was so determined to become a pirate that he first threatened to kill himself, and then threatened to kill his mother if he was not allowed to join Bellamy's crew. He sounds like a piece of work. As for Bellamy, he could not help but admire King's determination, and John King became not only the youngest member of Bellamy's crew, but also the youngest pirate ever known. Alright, at this point we're going to skip back, and we're going to read about A Barbarous Calling. with more info on pirates. A barbarous calling. Pirates were not the likable rogues portrayed in popular books and the movies. What has been referred to as the Golden Age of piracy was in fact a period of unrestrained murder, robbery, and kidnapping on the high seas. True stories of pirate cruelty shocked the populace throughout the 1700s. Among the most widely circulated tale was that of a captured merchant captain whose incessant talking so annoyed his pirate captors that they sewed his lips together with an enormous needle usually used to repair sails. Another defeated captain and his crew were sewn up in a sail and thrown overboard. When the sail washed ashore, 28 bodies were found inside. Many of the pirates' cruelest acts, including those of the men of the Whydah, were carried out against crews who refused to surrender immediately. Other brutalities were aimed at forcing a merchant vessel's captain and crew to reveal where their most valuable cargo was hidden. And records, including those of the Whydah, reveal that some pirates acted cruelly simply because it was in their nature. Over the years, pirates developed an arsenal of brutalities. One of their favorite tactics was called sweating, in which they forced their victim to run around and around the mainmast while they threw broken bottles at him and jabbed him with pointed tools or weapons. Another favorite was described by English Captain William Snelgrave. While being held captive on a pirate ship, he looked on in horror as the pirates abused a French captain who had refused to surrender when first fired upon. They put a rope about his neck, wrote Snelgrave, and hoisted him up and down several times to the main-yard arm, till he was almost dead. The French captain was actually lucky. On some occasions, when the victim survived hoisting, he was shot to death. It was a brutal business, and among the cruelest was pirate Edward Ned Lowe, described by his own men as a maniac and a brute. On one occasion, he had a merchant ship's captain and his entire crew of 32 men killed because the captain dropped a bag of gold into the sea rather than turning it over to Lowe. His own crew finally set Lowe adrift in an open boat without food or water. A French ship rescued him, but when they recognized him, they gave him a brief trial and then hanged him. No account of pirate cruelty would be complete without invoking the name of Blackbeard. Sam Bellamy's one-time shipmate and arguably the fiercest pirate captain of them all, once interrupted a friendly game of cards to shoot his first mate for no apparent reason. Asked why, Blackbeard replied that if he didn't shoot one or two of his crewmen now and then, they'd forget who he was. They gave him a brief trial and then hanged him. No account of pirate cruelty would be complete without invoking the name of Blackbeard. Sam Bellamy's one-time shipmate and arguably the fiercest pirate captain of them all, once interrupted a friendly game of cards to shoot his first mate for no apparent reason. Asked why, Blackbeard replied that if he didn't shoot one or two of his crewmen now and then, they'd forget who he was. Alright, back to Sam Bellamy, who's just been joined by the delightful 10-year-old John King. Bellamy was ready to sail on. He told Captain Savage that he was now free to sail away with the Bonetta as well. For Savage, being held captive for 2 weeks by Bellamy had been an extraordinary experience. During that time, he had looked on in amazement as Bellamy and his men, despite being in the middle of looting the Bonetta, had chased, captured, plundered, and then released a French merchant ship and 6 smaller vessels. What Savage also remembered vividly was Bellamy telling him that his greatest wish was to capture a vessel even bigger than the Marianne, so that he and his men could travel faster and farther in their quest to rule the seas. In December 1716, Bellamy got his wish. As he and Lebu were sailing the waters near Saba, a tiny 5-square-mile island off the Virgin Islands, they captured 2 ships, the Pearl and the Sultana. To Bellamy's delight, the Sultana was the type of ship that he was looking for to replace the Marianne as his flagship. After looting the Pearl and forcing several men from the Sultana to join his crew, Black Sam told Captain Tosor of the Pearl that he was free to sail away with his crew and the rest of the men from the Sultana. Then he transferred his own crew to his new flagship and handed over command of the Marianne to Palsgrave Williams. Alright, and next time we read Chapter 3, Bigger Ships, Bigger Prizes. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend and see you again next time for Teen Story Share.